The second kingdom after kingdom Monera is the kingdom Protista. Now, what is the characteristic feature of this kingdom is that this kingdom is also going to have all the unicellular organisms. You are not going to find any multicellular organism in this particular kingdom. The reason being that this particular kingdom is not having a defined boundary. Okay. Now, when I say that it is not having defined boundary, I need to point out to one thing, that all the eukaryotic organisms, now till now we had talked about just one kingdom, the exclusive one, which was again exclusively prokaryotic. That means there was no eukaryotic cell found in that particular kingdom. Whatever kingdoms are going to follow after that kingdom, they all have eukaryotic cells. Now, if I talk about kingdom Protista, it is going to have eukaryotic cells. If I talk about fungi, if I talk about plantae, and if I talk about Animalia, all these kingdoms have eukaryotic cells, which means that a well-defined nucleus is going to be present. But in kingdom Protista, the cell would be eukaryotic, but all the cells would be unicellular. Now, pay attention to one point, that if I am talking about a unicellular algae, algae otherwise is a plant, okay, it belongs to plantae, then that unicellular algae would be a protist, because as I told you, the organism has to be eukaryotic and it should be unicellular as an entity. So, the unicellular algae would be belonging to kingdom Protista. Then there would be other organisms which are unicellular. Supposedly there is an animal cell. Certain readers, they consider protozoans like Plasmodium. Example, it is an example, scientific name for the causative agent of malaria. So, that Plasmodium is a protozoan and it belongs to animal kingdom according to certain authors, but we have to consider all the unicellular eukaryotic organisms in kingdom Protista. So, we classify those protozoans under kingdom Protista. Now, let us see what are the examples that we have. What you see over here is, this is the simplest example, that scanning electron microscope presentation, which is further added color into it, and we have this picture, and this is Paramecium. This is what Paramecium looks like. Now, we have to see the diagrammatic representation and understand. I am sorry, it was not Paramecium, it was Euglena. We are going to take that as well. See, this is the one we see over here, and in the previous picture where was the introductory picture of this kingdom, this is Euglena, and we have example of Paramecium over here, we have example of Euglena over here, we have the example of diatoms as well, we have the example of unicellular algae. Now, one by one, let us see what it is. This is Paramecium, it is slipper like organism, you must have read about it in your younger classes. Now, what you see over here is, first of all, let us talk about the periphery. Now, the periphery is having so many appendages, cilia, which are responsible for its locomotion, that is movement in the water. They are water dwelling. So, you must keep in mind that as the life form had originated from water itself, so the simplest life forms that we talk about, we are talking about the aquatic life forms at present. Then we have a mouth pore. Because this is a eukaryotic organism, you can see the mention of a proper well bound by a membrane, a nucleus, not just one nucleus. Over here you are going to find two nuclei, that is macronucleus and micronucleus. There is an anal pore, there is a contractile vacuole for the purpose of osmoregulation. Now, what is osmoregulation? It is the maintenance of water balance inside the body. There is a food vacuole which is responsible for engulfing of the food. So, this is what a simplest Protist would look like, unicellular, and it is having all the eukaryotic organelles which are responsible for making it not prokaryotic and making it fall into kingdom Protista. Then the next thing is Euglena. The example is Euglena. What you see over here is a long flagella that is present. Now, this in the previous case for locomotion we had talked about cilia. Over here we see a long whiplash sort of, it is somewhat whip like tail, and that is known as flagella. Singular is flagellum, plural is flagella. Now, over here you see the body composition, and there is something green inside it. Now what is this green part? This is chloroplast. In the previous one we had talked about food vacuole. You saw in the case of Paramecium there was nothing like green which was visible. This is contractile vacuole, and this is again a contractile vacuole that is present. There is a food vacuole that is present. That means the mode of nutrition over here in this case is varied. So was in the case of Protista. They could be autotrophic, that means they were making their own food, as in the case of cyanobacteria. They could be phototrophic, they could be heterotrophic. In this case also we have nutrition of many types, that is either it is heterotrophic or it is autotrophic. When we talk about autotrophic, we are bound to have photosynthetic pigments inside the organisms, and that we see in the case of Euglena. Now you see chloroplasts over here. Euglena can do photosynthesis as well as at the same time it can be heterotrophic in its mode of nutrition. So this is what a Euglena looks like. Now there is another example for these diatoms, the simplest one that you have been drawing since your childhood. A very simple one, amoeba. This is what it looks like. Anything you want to draw, it would be amoeba. As far as I remember, when I learnt this amoeba, I was quite sure and certain that draw anything and just put few spots inside it, that would be amoeba, that it would look like. This is amoeba. This is also a unicellular organism. Over here what you find is that there is nucleus that is present. This is because this is a simple microscopic diagram. We do not have the labelings over here, but you know very well that it has a contractile vacuole inside it. These are the tube feet which are present. There is a cell membrane that is present. It cannot be classified into prokaryotic organisms as well as it cannot be classified into animals as well. Certain authors, yet again I would say, that they consider amoeba as an animal, but because it is unicellular and it is eukaryotic, it has been classified into protistans. The next example that we talk about is this. Now what is this? This, as you can see, this is a seashore, and we are having bioluminescent seashores. Now if you have been fortunate enough to see it with your own eyes, this looks very beautiful, and if not, you must have seen it in somewhere in movies or TV or somewhere else where it is being depicted in a very beautiful way. Now what are these? This is not a light that has been put into the water. This is bioluminescent dinoflagellates which are present on the seashore. Now what are these dinoflagellates? And of course diatoms, they are also protistans, the unicellular organisms which have the capability of emitting light by the physiological processes inside them. So this is dinoflagellates. I would repeat, little bit difficult it is, that because we are talking about protistans, because we are talking about those organisms which are unicellular and they are eukaryotic, we have kingdom Protista. Now inside kingdom Protista we had talked about Paramecium, that you have to remember. We had talked about unicellular algae. I did not give you example for that. I would give you unicellular algae is Chlamydomonas. This is again a scientific name, difficult to remember, but you have to do it because as I told you, anything eukaryotic and unicellular would come inside Protista. So we have Chlamydomonas. Then we had talked about amoeba, we had talked about that Euglena, Paramecium, these three examples, and now we are talking about diatoms. Now what are diatoms or dinoflagellates? They are also unicellular organisms. They are exclusively marine. You are going to find them in the ocean water only, or sea water, I would say, salt water to be very specific, and they are responsible for such phenomena of bioluminescence, and they are eukaryotic unicellular organisms. So you see that we are slowly and steadily including the diversity of the entire world that we see around us into the kingdoms, and by far we have seen those which cause diseases, we have seen those which are responsible for such beautiful phenomena, and apart from this there is a very notorious category of protistans that we have. Now what is notorious? Those which cause harm or those which are responsible for giving us some sort of discomfort, and those are protozoans. Now in the protozoans we have those examples of organisms which cause sleeping sickness, we have example of organisms which are responsible for causing malaria. So this is what we have to talk about the protistans.